Welcome to another Schools Motivational Speaker podcast. My name is Harun Rabbani. I am a motivational speaker. That's why it's called Schools Motivational Speaker Podcast, by the way. This podcast started off as me wanting to share amazing stuff with yourself, but I thought, you know what? There are a lot of other amazing people doing stuff that I don't do, and they need to be shared and they need to be shouted all over the UK and abroad. Today, one of the topics we're talking about is a very difficult topic for most people to even truly comprehend about conveying, relaying. So back in the 70s, where we grew up, the childhood that I had is very different to what you would have today. In that era, schools were allowed to use the cane, meaning corporal punishment. They did it. I was on the receiving end on occasions, and I was one of the good kids, by the way. That's now banned. It's illegal. A lot of families, young men and women, grew up in violence at home. That, I believe, is illegal, but it still goes on. Now, growing up in a violent neighborhood, so I grew up in later years in my teens in Sunderland, there was a lot of violence externally, a lot of racism. On top of that, we had domestic violence as well. It was a very tough situation. To us at the time, it was the norm. We didn't know what we didn't know. But the repercussions violence has, and not just physical violence, but emotional violence, the repercussions it has impacts the entirety of your life. I know that's because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients who've come to me for therapy. But so today, this is not about me. Today, we want to talk about that topic that teachers can't really, they're not trained to talk about. Maybe some of them, but generally they're not. And a lot of people, parents don't even understand. So I've got with me somebody who is taking a very innovative approach to addressing this issue. With me, we have Lise Kay Bell from the north of England, from Leeds actually, and she is going to be joining us, discussing what she's doing to help address the issue of domestic violence. Welcome to the podcast, Lise.
Thanks, Harun. Lovely to be on this podcast today.
Why is it important for teachers listening, parents listening, to understand the kind of work that you're doing, particularly violence, domestic violence? What do they need to know before we even talk about anything else?
It is a tricky subject, as you've already said, and actually teachers will shy away from it. But as of last year, we know that now any child that is in a household that has domestic abuse happening has become a victim of crime. So they are now legally victims of crime. And that affects about 20% of the UK population. So it's really important for teachers to understand, because it does have an impact on a child's productivity at school. It will have an impact on things like their eating habits, their behaviour, the way in which they present themselves, or not even coming to school in some instances. So teachers having an awareness of this topic is really key. But there's the other side of it as well, in terms of students having an awareness of this topic, because whilst 20% of young people are experiencing this at home, we know, because the statistics tell us, that a large proportion of those young people will either go into relationships in the future or possibly even become perpetrators of violence in the future. So this is about early intervention and preventing young people and going into these relationships and keeping themselves safe as well.
When we hear about early intervention, it's very easy for people to understand. It almost sounds like you're intervening with someone who's already a perpetrator, already guilty, when in reality, early intervention is required for many. So for yourself, this is a very difficult topic. What made you decide to work in this particular area? Why you?
Lived experience, which I don't really want to go into too much today, but so lived experience. And I started off actually talking in workplaces about this. My own experience meant that my workplace weren't listening to me. They didn't understand. And after a conversation with my 14-year-old daughter, I said, do you know what? I think I can go into schools. We've got something here. I can go into schools and talk about this. And her answer to me was, oh, no, Mum, no one wants to see an old lady with a PowerPoint. So that's why I changed my approach and have got an innovative way of addressing this topic that's engaging for what I call the TikTok generation.
Isn't it sad that when you got a teenager, they consider you as an old person? I remember when I was a teenager and I thought old, I thought about my grandparents' generation. But that's hey-ho, that's how it is, right? You're a few years older and you're an old person. You don't just go into schools, you do work in theatre. What does that look like?
Okay, so
for hundreds of
I
years?
actually set up an organisation called Soundproof Box. Operationally, we've been running since March last year and seen over 4,000 young people. So that's quite a phenomenal amount of young people to see in such a short space of time. And we do a number of things. So creative arts we use to get across the message. Our main core offering is an interactive theatre production called Red Flags, which is about engaging and educating teenagers and young adults on coercive control and domestic abuse. This is using actors, but it's a facilitated program. We have audience props. It works like a Saturday night game show, and it takes all the elements of Saturday night game show, pantomime, talk shows, using theatre actors. And it sounds like it shouldn't work, tackling such a difficult topic, but it absolutely works. We've kind of tapped into the fact that the TikTok generation, as I call them, Generation Z, Generation Alpha, want to be entertained, they want to be engaged, they don't want to be kind of given lots of PowerPoint and bored to death. We do speeches, and I talk in schools as well. So where a school doesn't want the show, I will talk about coercive control and domestic abuse, talk about cyberbullying as well and perpetrator behaviour, but using the Soundproof Box interactive approach. So we have giant flashcards, the audience have red flags. It's so high energy and interactive that it engages them.
Why do you think it engages them? I mean, educating teens, why does theatre engage them? I possibly couldn't imagine doing theatre. So why do you think it works?
Because the way it's written in very, and I've written it, so I can say this. So every 30 seconds is a red flag. So they have to intently listen in order to wave their red flag in the air. So we're giving them some engagement there. It's in short pieces, so it's not an end-to-end play. We don't deliver a 2-hour play. We do it in 10-minute slots. I learned very quickly from a marketing guy I was working with, this generation have the attention span of a gnat. If you do not engage them quickly enough, you've lost them. And what we do is, and what I do when I facilitate the show, is I engage them very quickly. They all have a goodie bag with a red flag in. They've got things to fiddle about with. Actually, what we've found is children with ADHD and ADD really like it because they don't have to sit still during the show.
Already, because I have some idea of what you do, listeners and viewers might not. I think what you're doing needs to be in every single school. I don't know how you're going to deliver it to every single school, to every single year throughout the country, but it needs to be. So you mentioned the word we. Who's we? Is it just you or is it other people?
So I set the organisation up and predominantly I facilitate it. I have 22 actors. I have 3 other facilitators that do things in our way. So I run the training programs in how the show should be facilitated, how it should be engaged, how we deal with the audience. And then we work with associates as well on script writing. So I work with an acclaimed criminologist on understanding perpetrator language so that we hit it right, safeguarding officers. So it is a full team now, but it did start off as me in a darkened room, tearing my hair out, writing scripts and going, how can I make this work? I'm very active and actively involved and actively speaking. So we is a team of about 28 people.
Wow, okay, so it's not a small team at all.
No. So when you said about moving down the country, actually, yes, we are. So we've got some work in Leicester and we're just about to do some work up in Newcastle as well. So we're trying to get country domination at the moment.
You need to talk to my sister, then she's a teacher in Leicester. I'll put you up. She's probably watching this. So if you're watching this, let's not get in touch. How does your production, your workshop, your plays, how does that differ from normal other productions? I don't want to call it bog standard. Oh, I did. How does it differ?
So it's not a full end-to-end play. It's a theatre and education piece. The audience have props and they are very much involved in the action. They get to dissect the what's happening on stage. They also get to interview the characters and find out what's going on inside their heads. So we do a full piece. We also, at the end, get them to interview the actors. So where we do have young people that are interested in performing arts, they can ask any questions they want about the career world of acting as well, and around using creativity as a role, as a job. We're giving them a bit of everything, really.
A lot of people going through violence at home, they'll be very introverted and in a shell, very quiet. They'll pretend everything's fine. I know, because I was one of them. They'll pretend everything's A-okay, nothing's wrong, but they also don't want to do stuff. So how do you get them to act?
Two types of audience, and usually we know beforehand, so we work with the schools to know who the students are and whether it's appropriate that they attend. Most of the time, they do want them to attend. So the introverted, what I usually do is I put them in groups. So if they're with a noisier crowd, and I give them even very small, because we have giant flashcards. So some of the introverted, and they are giant, it takes 4 people to lift them. So if there is an introverted person, I'll put them with someone who's more extrovert and say, look, you hold your flashcard. When you see gaslighting happening in the show, I want you to wave it. So they are participating, but it's not, they're doing it alongside friends. We do sometimes get young people that are triggered by the themes, and we work very closely with the safeguarding team. There's only been one incident where I've had to stop the show, and what I would do then is we take the actors out of character and we introduce them to as normal human beings, and they get to meet them as humans. And that's another reason why we do the work at the end, where they can interview the actors as they are, not as the characters, because it's very important that they understand there's a distinction between them playing the role and actually them being normal human beings. So we're very careful. So we will get young people to participate, even in something mild as waving a flag or a flashcard with friends. And then where we've got the ones that are really kind of pent up, we use it as an opportunity to discuss. But that's the skill of the facilitator. I don't generally facilitate most of the shows, and I've got another sort of 2-3 trusted people, but it has to be done in a very careful way, because when we're dealing with a very difficult subject.
Yeah, I've come across lots of situations where you can see the young person's very uncomfortable at home. I was speaking at a workshop with Employability UK actually relatively recently, and there were a group brought together who are transitioning into secondary school, or I think they'd already transitioned actually. One group was 10, 11-year-old, another group was 12, another group 13, and they were from different schools. And one particular group of young people, the younger ones, the youngest ones there, they were from a very socially challenged areas. There's an exercise I do regarding values. What does respect mean to you? And it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, the responses people were giving, the young people. A lot of them were saying respect means listening. Respect means accepting what someone's saying without judging them. And the young people, the one from the difficult areas, unanimously respect means to them being loved. And I mean, I was nearly in tears. I'm actually nearly in tears just thinking about it, because when it's missing, you recognize it. It's like when the weather, well, right now at the time of recording is now January, it's freezing cold outside. And I'm sure so many people are thinking, when's the sun going to be here? When's it going to get warm again? So when it's missing, you recognize it. So what you are doing, my friend, is so deeply empowering. Like I said, it's not something discussed enough. People aren't taking any responsibilities. Let's move on to the teachers for a moment, because they're not trained. Generally, they're not trained. Yes, they get some training for sure, but they're not therapists. And they're not meant to be therapists. They're meant to be teachers. Is there anything, or are there any things they can do, either strategies, techniques, tactics, that you thought, okay, from my experience as a facilitator, these are the things, maybe teachers can learn these 1, 2, 3 things which might help them in the meantime while they wait for you to turn up?
Yeah, and quite often it is about having a listening ear and showing compassion. It's a very difficult dynamic if a young person comes to you and says this is happening at home, because that's where the safeguarding officers are involved in schools. But having that listening ear, showing compassion, believing, I say 3 things: being listened to, being believed, and not being judged. They're the 3 key things that whether you're a victim, survivor of domestic abuse, or you're a bystander of it as well. Also, we don't just run the show, we offer a follow-up workshop with the students and the teachers. We have resources for teachers to use around using the right terms, the education, and actually where to signpost as well if things are happening. It is an awareness. What we don't want to do is open a huge can of worms, because it can be quite dangerous. So it is about awareness. And I talk about early intervention. What if we can prevent a young person going into coercive relationship in the future, then our work is done. And that's what it's about. And also teachers can spot changes in students as well. You know, as their behaviour changes, have they become quiet, as you said? Have they not interested in their work? It could be in multiple other reasons, but sometimes we talk about mental health a lot in schools. Domestic abuse can manifest itself as a mental health problem. It's not always got to the bottom of. So I think the listening, being believed, not being judged, and knowing how to signpost are really the key things. Again, we work with other charities that do that signposting.
I know your work is primarily with young people and then some of it with teachers. Let's talk about parents, because majority of parents, now I'm talking about those who are somehow involved in domestic abuse, meaning being abusive. Most parents have absolutely zero intention of being a horrible, nasty monster to their child, because that's the impact it will have. I'm just saying it's very judgmental and subjective of me, but most parents, I would imagine, and there are psychopaths and sociopaths, we'll put them aside, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. Those who are domestically violent or verbally abusive, talk to them. But before you do that, let's just distinguish. When you talk about domestic violence, are you talking about physical violence? Are you talking about mental? Are you talking about emotional?
Talking about the whole lot, the whole spectrum, from coercive control, which is also illegal and has been since 2015, all the way through to violence. And actually, it's possible to experience emotional and psychological control and not ever face any violence, but it's not possible to have violence without coercive control, because it's a
What is coercive control? What does that
coercive
mean?
control is where you make it impossible for somebody to live a normal life. So you might control their finances, you might control who they hang out with, you isolate them from friends and family, you might remove birth certificates, you might remove passports, you may just stop them living a normal life. Food can be used as well, where cupboards can be locked in households, and only but you have to ask permission of the person who's the head of the household to have that food. All these things, it's just a series of controlling behaviours, and actually it is now unlawful to control somebody's life.
Again, remember, we're talking to a very narrow, small group of people who would even want to be anything like we've just described here. How would they address their own thinking and behavior? I mean, you might not even be in a position to be able to understand, explain that, but what would you say to them? Because you see the repercussions, of course.
Boundary setting is a really good thing. So I see it in friendship groups, or when we're working with teens and they've got in their first kind of boyfriend-girlfriend situation, and they're isolating them from their friends and family. I would always say to a young person, make sure you keep your friends. Don't be just someone else's world and you be in that world. Don't drop out of university, college, studies because someone is pressurizing you into doing that. Don't change the way you look or dress for someone else as well. So having these boundaries in place and saying no is a really key thing. Abusers don't like boundaries. So if you set boundaries and stick to them, you're less likely to become in those controlling relationships. Look, I'm not saying it'll never happen.
Can you talk to the parents? Because that sounds like you're talking to the students. Talk to the parents. What would you, if they're watching, maybe one person's watching, what would you?
Yeah, we had a lot of parents in a show on Saturday. So we did a public show where we invited parents in the community of Seacroft in Leeds and young people in. One of the things we say to parents, we look at things to spot what are you looking out for. So as your child suddenly changed their personality, have they stopped hanging out with the friends that they were doing? Are they feeling a little bit more isolated? Are they starting to dress differently and wear things in a different way when before that they weren't. Are they using language patterns like I can't or I'm not allowed to? It might be that they have a boyfriend/girlfriend that is controlling them. Whilst we want to think that our children don't go into relationships before they enter sort of 16, 18, they do. They absolutely do. And I have a lot of parents coming to me and saying, I think my son or my daughter has got a controlling partner. They're only 15. I thought it wasn't serious, but actually they've stopped doing the things that they love. They've dropped out of their sports club or their drama club, and they're just always with this other person. So it's looking out for those things. The worst thing a parent can do is be judgmental, is badmouth the partner, because that is a surefire way with a teenager to drive them towards them, not away from them. If you say, don't do this, don't hang out with that person anymore, I don't want you seeing them anymore, what will happen? Well, I know what would happen if it was my teenage daughter. She'd be like, get lost, Mum. I'm going to go and do exactly the opposite of what you've just said. They also might not be aware. So for a parent, it's just being there, asking if they're all right, spotting the changes in their behaviour, trying to engage them in the things that they always liked before, but not pushing it too hard, because if you push it too hard, you'll push them towards that abusive partner, boyfriend, girlfriend.
Being a Bangladeshi immigrant, which is what I was, still am, Bangladeshi immigrant, being raised in a predominantly Christian school, because back in the 70s, we did all the Christian songs and so on and so on. Christian school in a Bangladeshi immigrant, Christian school in a Bengali-speaking household, going to a Muslim mosque. Obviously, all mosques are Muslim. Going to a mosque, there's massive clash of cultures, and I don't expect you to know the answer to that. And it's interesting because some of the things you're saying is also perception. So, for example, if you take a young Muslim living in a Muslim environment, meaning a school where there's a lot of Asians and Muslims, etc., when a parent says you have to go to the mosque, etc., it might sound coercive, or it might be Christians saying church or synagogue, or it might sound coercive. So there's a bit of clash of cultures and a clash of values going on. But I think I personally want to talk to parents on this particular occasion, which is to say to them that I invite you to look deep inside of yourself. If you are somebody who has got emotional roller coaster issues, are you expressing it? Are you translating it back to your children? Because I want to give you an example. When my oldest was 3 years old, I remember, or 4 years old, something like that. I'd been going through a divorce at the time. It's a long-winded process. I've got this beautiful plant in a big plant pot, and he was starting to play with the soil. And I snapped at him. By the way, there's one of maybe 2 or 3 times in his entire life. I think it was 1 or 2 times I snapped at him. What are you doing? A couple of minutes later, I asked myself, what's going on inside of me that I'm projecting my anger to my son, onto my son? Part of his role description, job description, is to explore, is to be adventurous, is to play with mud and dirt. That's part of his job description. It comes with his birth rights. Why the heck am I taking it out on that child? And so if we then magnify it out to when we have emotional issues, could be anger, could be sadness, could be grief, how much are you projecting onto your kids? Now, it's not about blame or shame or anything like that. If you are doing that consistently, you need to get help. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just that something actually could be technically wrong going on in your head. It could be a bit of a screw loose. It doesn't make you a bad person. What makes you a bad person is when that escalates into verbal abuse and violence. Yeah, there's no pissing about here. Sorry about the language. You have to get help as early as possible. Now, if you're already violent, seek help from, first of all, friends, counselors, therapists. If you're a Muslim, go to an imam or sheikh. If you're a Christian, go to whoever in place of authority that you have respect for. There's nothing to be ashamed of asking for help. It takes courage. A lot of people might think, oh my God, what will people think of me? Well, let me ask you this. What will people think of you when they find out later on that you got a very traumatized child into their adulthood, or worse? So, Lise,
absolutely. Yeah, and some of these, we all as parents, do lash out at our kids from time to time. Doesn't make it right. It just means we're human. So I want to distinguish between where it is absolutely total and utter abuse, and actually some of it's just normal frustrations of being a parent. You know, we all face that. I'm guilty of that. I'm a parent. You know, I will occasionally say something to my daughter in a raised tone. It's not great because I'm frustrated or stressed. But when it becomes something really serious and you've got someone by the throat and you're throwing them up against a wall and they're a minor, then, you know, that is starting to wander into abusive. Well, it is abuse. It's not even wandering into abusive situations.
It is abuse. Yeah.
Absolutely is. And what my work is doing is arming young people with the education so that when they move forward into their future lives, that actually these things are minimized and not happening as much. And also, if they are quite an empathic child, that they're creating boundaries that say, no, I won't accept that behavior from you. I do not want to live in a household that is displaying this behavior.
I've worked with hundreds outside of working in schools. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of diabetics and even more people with chronic disease. Here's what I found with diabetics in particular. You mentioned empaths and empathy. I don't think there's an exception. Every single type 2 diabetic I've worked with is super empathic. And everyone I've worked as a one-to-one, they go back to the time where they felt loved and life was a joy for them. So shortly after they're born and they're conscious about it. But then one day the loving was gone, the sweetness from their life is gone, and it's usually triggered by either something that's said or something that's done, usually of a violent nature. And so their habits become, they look out for things to bring that sweetness back, which becomes literal, meaning food. Food is a great way to get that dopamine fix and get that temporary thing of like, it's like sugar is more addictive than crack cocaine. So that habit continues, and at some point it turns to insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and eventually diabetes. That actually gets triggered. Most people, I've not met anyone who doesn't get their diabetes triggered as a childhood, by the way. So the consequences are real. And also for people to think, because I can imagine some people who are in a difficult situation because, cost of living crisis going on, and they say, I don't have time to deal with this. I haven't got the headspace. Let Lise and her team deal with it. Well, there's only one Lise and her company. There's other people doing other stuff. Everybody needs to play their role. It takes a village to raise a child, not just the parents or not just the teacher. So I know I'm going off on one only because I've seen the repercussions of what happens when you're not addressing these things. So with your theatre production that you do with young people, where are you taking? Where do you see it going into the future?
So definitely nationally this year, but we've had some interest internationally. So we've had some interest over in America, and with the right sort of investment, we want to take it globally. When you've got an audience of adults and parents and young people, as we had on Saturday, and the feedback has been phenomenal, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. They were all in tears by the end of it, and they were like, wow. That's made me question my own behavior. It's made me question people around me. That's what we want to do. We want to create that impact that people go away going, oh, okay, so what does that mean for me?
To understand your organization, is it a charitable status? Is it a limited company?
We are a community interest company, but off the back of that, I have an organization called Red Flags Interactive, which is all the resources packaged up, including the scripts, that are sold on a license to theatre companies, schools that want to put this on. They receive our training, our way of doing it. So it's almost like a TEDx model in that, you buy the license to put on our events, but you do it in our way.
Absolutely love it. So I have a very strong suspicion you're going to get international very quickly, particularly as you've done so many schools already in a very short space of time. What can get people talking more about this work? Well, how can we get the word out more besides podcasting?
Yeah, follow us on social media. So we are at soundproofbox.org. on TikTok. So we're on TikTok because that's the generation where we're meeting the needs of. At Instagram, we're at Soundproof_Box. At Facebook, just out at Soundproof Box. And LinkedIn at Soundproof Box CIC. We are on all the social medias. If you put in at Soundproof Box, you will find us. We've got the green symbol. But yeah, reach out to me at Lise Kay Bell. I am on LinkedIn predominantly. I am on the other social media sites, but LinkedIn is my main platform. Yeah, and I'm posting events. Come and see one of our shows. We do offer a show in a hybrid format. So the show we did Saturday was offered with a live audience and a live streamed audience at the same time. So we had about 70 live streamed and about 40 in the small auditorium. So we can reach quite a lot of people at once through our work.
I hope my contacts and connections are listed from the West Midlands region are listening, by the way, because there's some which is where I'm from, there are some very, how can I say, deprived neighborhoods. I know there's up and down the country, but particularly if you're a politician wanting to become the new regional Lord Mayor, whatever it is, I think it's Mayor, then Richard, watch his space, get in touch with these people.
On that point, we are working with the Mayor in West Yorkshire, so we do loads of work up here with the Mayor, and we want to replicate that across the country. And I did live for 18 years in Cannock in Staffordshire, so I'm very familiar with the
God, well, Cannock and Tipton, lovely places for people to visit if you're already living there. Environmentally, it looks gorgeous. That's all I can say. And on the map, it looks really nice as well. Who else would be interested in this kind of work that you're doing? Who else could benefit in this?
Yeah, so we work with the police. We're used as police training days. So because we tackle early intervention around coercive control, domestic abuse, the police usually get to an incident when it occurs to be violent or really serious. What they don't see is the lead up to it. So we do quite a bit of training and away days for the police force. We're endorsed by West and North Yorkshire Police at the moment. The councils, so we're working with Blaby Council in Leicestershire, we're working with Bradford Council, Leeds City Council, Barnsley Council, actually businesses, because businesses need to understand the dynamic of what's happening for their employees at home, particularly when you've got employees who have maybe had a dip in performance. So we run this workshop and theatre experience for workplaces. We're always looking for sponsorship as well for our programme. So if anyone wants to sponsor a really good cause and get the word out there. Youth groups, you name it, anyone really, because 1 in 3 women face this and 1 in 4 men. So it's actually, the stats are really high for domestic abuse in the UK.
Lise, all I can say is, right, you come to the right place, Schools Motivational Speaker Podcast. It was interesting because when I started podcasting back in the mid-2000s, quite a few people I've worked with, they've went on to go on to do big things. I hope you remember this interview, by the way. So is there any final message you want to share with our listeners? And by the way, I don't want anyone walking away thinking, oh my God, domestic violence. Yes, oh my God, domestic violence, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff we talked about. I want you to go away thinking there is hope for little communities, for young people. There is hope, and never ever lose that hope. What's your final message you want to share, Lise?
If we can educate our young people earlier, we're going to prevent those statistics being 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And that's the overriding message I want to get across, that it's about education.
You've been watching the Schools Motivational Speaker Podcast. My name is Harun Rabbani, and I was joined by Lise Kay Bell, and I am a Schools Motivational Speaker. If you want to transform your life, if you want to transform your community, then great place to start. To start off with young people. There's been many guests on this podcast. Make sure you get in touch with the person that resonates with you most and work with them closely, because you know what? If you're a teacher, a head teacher, you are not alone. Beyond your school, there are people there who are highly experienced experts who know what they're talking about, who will help your job to become a lot more easier. Thank you so much, Lise. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Make sure you share and like this podcast. Bye for now.